Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today I'm gonna review the list that you've submitted to me and see what I would suggest to improve about them. So obviously it is still very new in the expansion, so there's no certainty whatsoever, and there's definitely a lot of things that are gonna depend on the meta, and there's certainly a lot of things that I'm likely to have wrong in its early stages, but I think I have a few interesting feedback to give on some of those lists, not only about the card shows themselves, but also about the general concept on how I would go about like building a deck. So you've submitted to me about a dozen lists that I'm gonna review today, and without further ado, we're gonna start with the first list that a list that was sent to me. It is a Han Yellow discard list. So the idea of the list is to play kind of like, it looks a little bit like a Han mid-range, like a hold Han mid-range with red, but this time it's with the new Han, which does something similar as you get to play things a little bit faster. It doesn't have the ability to double ramp like the old Han can, which means that 7 drops are naturally going to be a little bit worse. But it really goes heavily into this discard theme. We got not only Pillage and Thorrk, but also Cripple Authority, Spark of Rebellion, and even False Surrender, and of course Podamron and K2SO can also discard as well. So I can see here an interesting theme that is going on, or even playing as far as Body Rook. So I think the concept of, so let's talk first about the game plan. So the idea of this deck is obviously to kind of like strip down the opponent with his cards so he cannot really play the game, and then go to the later stage of the game and try to win the game with super expensive cards. So the problem with this card in this game is, like, even though it is very useful if your opponent has no board whatsoever and you can discard it, prevent him from playing his card, this is where this card is it's going to be at its best. The problem here is that this deck is a relatively late game oriented deck. It's a mid-range, relatively late game focused deck, and it doesn't play any removal whatsoever. So it doesn't even play any ambush unit. And that's going to be a big problem, because if your unit plays a unit and you cannot really deal with that unit, there's going to be a lot of situations where you're simply just going to lose right away. So yes, your units that stick on the board can eventually attack, but with the amount of discard that you're playing, you might not have that much board presence, and the problem is that there's going to be a lot of situations where your opponent is going to stick threat to the board, and you're going to be in big trouble because you cannot deal with them. Because your deck has literally no removal, no ability to interact with what's on the board. I think you bought a little bit, so this is a list of Luke 733, so I think he bought a little bit too much into the discard theme. I think that Spark of Rebellion, Fourth Throw, Pillage, and maybe False Surrender is, plus of course the K2SO and the Podamron, is enough. I don't think Cripple Authority is going to be a good card, at least not a good card out of the main deck, because the thing is, to play that card, you need to have your opponent have more resources than you do. And the problem is, like, that's not always going to be the case. So you want the Cripple Authority. So Cripple Authority is going to be unplayable in certain matchup, because obviously you want to go up to at least 8 to get into Dragon with Han Solo discount. So that means you're going to be resourcing almost every turn. So this card is literally going to be unplayable against most matchup, because most matchup play just one resource a turn. So unless you're playing against a ramp deck, this card is going to be unplayable. I also think that Body Rook at 5 is not so amazing. I mean, I play Body Rook at 5 in my sideboard of my hand green, because I can pull it out of the Ring for Reinforcement, and it is a sideboard card, which means it's only a card I would consider to be worth playing against hard control. Against control decks in general. Body Rook at 5 in the main deck, I think is too is too expensive, and is not worth it in my opinion. So you end up here with, I think that what I would do here is that I would replace some of the discard, which I don't think is that good, and I would replace it by removal, like Daring Raid, maybe Open Fire, maybe Waylay or Spare the Target, in order to be able to have some sort of interactions with the opponent. Another thing, so there's a couple of cards in there that I don't think are really good. So mostly is Principal Outlaw. I don't think is is a very good card, just as simple as that. I think if you're really looking for a good smuggle card, I would consider playing Tech or L337, which you do play in the sideboard. But I think there's just better things to do in those color combinations. I don't think this card is very competitive. I don't know if you need Force Surrender. I mean, it can be quite nice if you can trigger it, so I would say that's fine. So yeah, basically it's a mid-range deck on the removal. So I like the interaction between obviously Fortho and having those early game Force units. We got both Grogu and Ezra. Obviously it's only 6 Force unit and your leader is not Force, so triggering the Fortho removal is not going to be that easy to do. But the good news is that in this specific deck, just playing one resource to discard an opponent card can be worth it even if you don't have a Force unit, because you have this. Because this card is kind of a theme that kind of synergize with itself in sense that if you have a lot of discard and you're like, the more you discard, the higher the quality of the card you're gonna discard is gonna go up. So the first discard usually don't do much, but then the first few next discard can discard something really big. And this is the reason why I believe that Fortho can be a good card even if you don't have a fourth unit in play. So that's it for the deck. The sideboard makes a little bit of sense. Oh yeah, another big criticism for the deck is the lack of space unit. So if you are, especially since you're not playing any removal, if your opponent goes in space, the only thing you have is going to be your Falcon. That is not enough against most aggro deck or even anything that goes into space. You're going to be a lot of trouble dealing with it. Basically, your deck cannot deal with it at all. It doesn't have any removal to kill them. And so I would consider, of course, replacing the Outlaw and maybe put the Ezra Gunship in there as a replacement. Maybe place the 5/6/5 that can go in space. I mean, you do have the black one, but his stats for cost are not exactly super exciting. Well, I think if you replace the Outlaw by the gunship and then you put some removal in there, that maybe that will be enough. But you're gonna need to have a lot more interaction in space. This is just not enough space unit for a deck, especially since your top end here they have ambush. They're not able to kill any space unit either. Also, Crater Dragon doesn't affect space unit as well, so a complete lack of space unit. So yeah, less discard, more removal, and more space unit would be my general advice for this deck. Next we got another take on the discard Han Yellow. And this one is, as you can see, a lot more aggressive focus. So I think the idea is to put a lot of pressure on your opponent early on, and then prevent your opponent from playing and from getting ahead in the late game by discarding him very heavily. So this is, I'm not sure if this game plan is really gonna work, but I haven't tested it myself, so I would definitely give it a try. I think that in that specific game plan, the list makes a lot of sense in terms of how it puts pressure on the opponent. It has solid, like Han Solo can play all those cards here, the 3-drops as in turn 1. So it does have the Grogu, Ezra, 4th row synergies. Grogu, not really exactly a great card in an aggressive deck, because this is clearly an aggressive deck, as you can see. But it has some mid-range stuff. Pole Armor on. Here, Wrecker makes sense in this deck because he has nothing above Curve 6, so he can really easily use the ability. Black One is going to be very good as well. And maybe something I would consider in this deck would be the 2/2 for 3 that deals 2 damage whenever a card is discarded. Maybe that would be a good turn 1 play in this deck. This card is much, I forgot his name, but this card is much better in a Kylo Ren deck, but I think in this deck it could be good, and also in the previous deck as well, it could be something worth trying. Every time you discard a card, you basically deal 2 damage. Also works greatly with Black One. If you have this card into play, you play Black One, then you can trigger this 3 times in a row. 2 damage, 2 damage, 2 damage. That can be very powerful. So yeah, maybe something to consider. Here, as you can see, Mikelo really focused on the strict minimum in terms of like the best discard card. And I think it makes the deck overall going to make the deck a lot more consistent and a lot better. Guerrilla Attack Pod is very powerful with Han, so I like this a lot. Yeah, I think the deck is interesting. The thing I don't like is I'm not a big fan of Desperate Attack. I mean, yes, okay, you can damage unit very easily using Han Solo's ability, but I think you'd be better off just playing more copies of DL44 44 Blasters, which I think is an excellent card. especially in this deck. And you would be also better off maybe play a third copy of black one. But overall, I think this deck is like is seems if the game plan works, which means the game plan of like being aggressive and then in the late game discarding cards. If that game plan works, I think it's pretty close to where you want to be. I think with the deck, I think it's a very well built deck. Next we got Grand Inquisitor Blue, which is obviously a deck that we know and love from Spark of Rebellion. So Grand Inquisitor Blue, I've never been like, and this deck has been played a lot because it's kind of the obvious kind of synergies between the self-damage cards and the Grand Inquisitor and the grid card and stuff. However, the deck has really failed to make a dent in the meta. In my opinion, the best version of Grand Inquisitor in set 1 was Grand Inquisitor Green, because it could basically keep itself the red black archetypes, the red black, all the good stuff from red black, which are like the most powerful Grand Inquisitor cards are in red black, and then keep itself and play all the most powerful green black cards. So basically, what are you really getting out of set 2 by playing blue? Well, you are getting the Needlebone Enforcer, which is basically kind of extra copies of Scoutback Pursuer. Scoutback Pursuer I think is slightly better, but I think it's a solid card. It's obviously good to have like those very consistent turn 1 play that I think are going to be very powerful. And it's getting the client, which I think is quite good with Grand Inquisitor, because there's quite a few new cards, like mostly Jango Fett and Christian, which basically gain bonus for bounty units being in play, and I think the client is probably one of the best bounty card that you can play in blue. So that's nice. And then obviously you got your removal, takedown, Power of the Dark Side. So what can I say about? But yeah, you're not really getting a whole lot. Like you're getting basically 2 cards. You're basically getting 2 cards, on top of the Scoutback Pursuer from the set 1. So you're basically getting in total like 3 cards plus a couple of removals, which you could get like in green would give you access to. So I'm still not entirely sure whether the blue version is the way to go for a competitive Grand Inquisitor list. But obviously, for the purpose of the commenting this list, we're gonna focus on trying to make blue work. So thanks Iratorum for sending me that list. So basically, what do I think about it? So first of all, I do not like Death Trooper or Dr. Pershing in this deck. So Death Trooper is a card that I think gets much better in if you get access to Energy Conversion Lamp, and it gets much better if you get access to Krennic, because he becomes like a 4/1. Also, the idea of damaging your own unit, I mean, it's nice with grids, but it also makes it, you already have an ability to gain value for damaging your own unit with Grand Inquisitor, so you don't need anything else to deal damage to your unit on top of that. And I would even argue that sometimes dealing your damage to your unit is very annoying, because then you end up in those situations where now you can't use Grand Inquisitor's ability anymore. So my opinion is that I don't like Death Trooper in Grand Inquisitor deck. I make this realization very early on in set 1. I think Dr. Pershing is kind of the same as that. So here it's kind of like the idea of the game plan. So here is clearly going from sort of mid-range deck. So this is kind of the thing is the game plan here is not super clear. I think the deck wants to be aggressive with those very aggressive turn 1 play, and I think you should embrace the aggressivity and focus on that a little bit more. And I think Dr. Pershing does the opposite of this. It draws you card. You really don't need to draw a card in the specific deck, in my opinion. And it doesn't have any particularly good synergies with Grand Inquisitor. I mean, I guess, yeah, you can draw 2 cards on the same turn by untapping him or whatever, but I don't really think that's what you need to be doing in this deck. So yeah, I would definitely get rid of that and try to find more space to try to be a bit more aggressive. Next we got the Power of the Dark Side, a takedown. So as a removal, okay. The rest of the deck makes sense. Another problem with the deck is I think you play too many 5-drops here. So I understand that Clan Challengers is a very good addition to the deck. Christian is okay, and then Seven Sister is really good. So there's definitely a curve issue in this deck. As you can see, we have tons of 3-drops here with the client. I think you should play 3 copies of the client. And then you got, on top of this, the Death Watch Loyalist, the Fifth Brother, the Punishing One. All these are essential, but then you also play Death Troopers, so you can shave a few Death Troopers in order to have a little bit less 3-drops, the curve. Then going on to 4-drops, you don't have really any real 4-drops. Those are like kind of reactive cards, so you can't really play them on curve. So maybe play the Blaze Malbus and a Jango Fett in there to have a bit real proactive 4-drops, and then you got too many 5-drops with like a total of 9 proactive 5-drop. That's like a lot. So, and then you got the Ruthless Raider, which is a very well-rounded card, but it doesn't have any particular synergies with Grand Inquisitor. So, yeah, and of course, so you got a 4th row. You got, yeah, you got 4th unit. So, Death Star Stormtrooper, I guess, is to go alongside the Enforcer whenever you go double 1-drop opening to put a pressure on the opponent. Okay, that makes sense if you're going for the aggressive approach. Same with Snowtrooper. So yeah, I would try to embrace a little bit more this aggressive approach that you're going for here. By playing yeah, and yeah, try to be a bit more aggressive. I guess yeah. The sideboard, I'm not going to comment too much on sideboard because this is really something I think is important whenever you play aggro is to try to have a balance between ground unit and space unit. Here you don't really have a lot of space units. I think whenever you're trying to play aggro, being able to play on both ground and space is very important. So maybe play more copies of Inferno 4. Maybe play the Flank Fighters in the main deck because I think destroying enemy equipment is just super valuable. And try to get like some both a balance between ground and space to try to attack on both sides. Overall, I'm not super optimistic by this deck. I don't feel like it's getting enough. Basically, you gotta understand that the power level of decks is gonna go up with the new expansion, and I don't feel like this deck is really getting enough new tools to be a lot better. So yeah, I'm not a big believer in this deck. Another suggestion I would make would be to play Security Complex for Grand Inquisitor, because I think if there's one deck in the meta that really likes Security Complex, it has to be this one. Basically, be able to generate a 3/2 of no, sorry, that's gonna be like a 3. So yeah, it's gonna be 1/4. Then you untap it, it gets +2 attack. Yeah, basically generate a 3/2 and then add a shield on it. So 3/2 shielded on turn 1 can be pretty effective. So I would a 3/2 that can attack right away. That I think that would be very effective to be able to do that. Be able to protect your early, because this is really the key of the deck, right? Those 2 cards here are really the reason to play blue. And being able to protect those units so they can attack longer, be able to protect your 5th brother, all of this I think is going to be very valuable. So you should definitely think about protecting them. Be able to protect your Death Watch Loyalist when he becomes like a 5/1, and be able to protect him with a shield. That's going to be immensely valuable. So I would definitely think about that. Next we got another Garon Yellow Blue. Oh yeah, so yeah, good example of a space unit, aggressive space unit that you can run into your deck. It is definitely Kylo Ren Tile Silencer. So this will allow you to balance a little bit more space and ground. So you see this deck has a much better balance of space, even though it should absolutely play 3 copies of Punishing One. This card is an absolute must-have in this deck. So here it's more the card choice that I will criticize. So I still think Fifth Brother is absolutely essential for the deck to run. Even though this version is not playing 4th row, it doesn't matter. Fifth Brother is too good in Grand Inquisitor to be played in less than 2 copies. So here, once again, a bit too many 5-drops. Decided to cut on the 7th Sister, which I'm not against the idea. It's right to play a lot of bounty to enable the Jango Fett and the Christian. I think in this case, if your plan is really to enable bounty, maybe you should be playing the client. Okay, the keep finding is interesting. You can definitely do some interesting stuff with that. Um, Another thing is so a bit lighter on removal to be a bit more proactive. I don't think Reckless Gunslinger is specifically good in this deck, but it's a smuggle card, so it's never completely wasted. I'm not sure how consistently you're going to be able to get those bounties out for Jango Fetts. It seems to be very clunky to literally just have 5 bounty just to enable Jango Fett, and those bounties are not particularly impressive. In my opinion, the only bounties that are worthy of being played outside of bounty decks are the green bounties, like the ramp one and the one that the bounty antiquary, the one that allows you to search for a 3-drop. The red bounties are a lot less impressive, and it's a little bit clunky to have to play them just for this. So I forgot the name of this card here. It's called Roque Gunship. So yeah, Roque Gunship here. I'm not a big fan of that card at all. Um, and I think if you really want to run to a more 2-drop in space, you'd be sure running the mercenary starship, which is the 3/2 for it's basically extra 3/2 for 2s for your deck. But I think in Grand Inquisitor it makes more sense um, to play Inferno 4 because you can untap it with Grand Inquisitor's ability. So yeah, playing Inferno 4 makes a little bit more sense as a 2-drop. And yeah, so definitely interesting to see if blue and once again play security complex as your base would be a good idea. So I think between if we take the good ideas from this deck and the good ideas from the previous deck, there's a way to build something that is, in my opinion, significantly better. Would that be good enough though? I don't know, but definitely worth exploring. Next we got a Jabba Red deck, and I actually myself built a Jabba Red deck, so I'll be able to comment on that a little bit more. So it's made by the Rebel Pebble. So interesting. So basically, as most Jabba deck are, it's try to be a ramp deck, but that doesn't actually play any ramp. Relies exclusively on Jabba's ability to ramp into. I believe that Ray Supplies and Super Laser Technicians are too good of a cards to not be played in a ramp deck like this, where you have so many super powerful late game cards. I think you would benefit from running a lot more ramp and not just rely on Jabba ability, because not only your ramp will allow you to play your big threat faster, you're also enabled to play your Jabba faster. So I think actual just real ramp is super valuable in a deck like this. I like the Gamer and Guard, but so we got of course the Bounty Hunter synergies going with Jabba the Hutt, which makes sense. I don't like Consortium Star Viper in this particular deck because you do not play Energy Conversion Lab, so Consortium Star Viper is going to be very difficult to use. I'm not sure how much I like Rook, generally speaking. I've never been a massive fan of Rook. I think it's very much a meta call. I think it's fine in Grand Inquisitor because you can untap him and attack him right away, so you have this element of surprise. But without ECL, without the ability to untap it with Grand Inquisitor's ability, I think the Rook is just too easy to play around, too difficult to make work, and there's also too many matchups in which the card is simply not good enough. 2 copies of Overwhelming Barrage is criminal in my opinion. I think Overwhelming Barrage is still very much the best card in the game. Yeah, I still believe it's like, if not the best, at least top 3 best card in the game. Even after Shadows of the Galaxy, this card is absolutely insane and is an absolutely 3 of auto inclusion in any black-green deck, and I don't want to hear about it. Like, once again, the only basically decks, the green-black decks where I would not include Overwhelming Barrage would be in a sort of maybe in a hard control black-green deck that doesn't play any units, but even that deck doesn't, I don't think this deck is very good anyway, so Overwhelming Barrage is basically an auto-include. I like the idea, so basically because you get discount with the resource, you play a couple of 1-drop. I think that's fine. Not sure if that's really needed though. I don't like Kylo Ren if you don't have a way to give him ECL. Actually, I think Kylo Ren is simply just not going to be very good here. I would even, yeah, the ability is, most of the units are villainy, so you can't even use the ability really. So it's basically just a 8/7 for 6, which is not terrible, but it's very, very slow, so there's simply no reason to play Kylo Ren in this deck. Like, Kylo Ren is just extremely slow. This deck would benefit a lot more by playing Vader. If you're playing Vader here, you can search for phase 3 Dark Troopers to have like Sentinels on the ground, uh, Toro to have like Bounty Hunters on the ground, and I would also consider playing maybe the 3-2. If you want to have more defense against space, I would rather play the 3-2 Sentinel that you can also search from Vader, so I think Vader would be very good in this deck. Anyway, if you want to have, I've basically built the same idea of this deck on my channel, so feel free to check it out. It's on my first video, whereas first look at Shadow of the Galaxy. I don't say my list is perfect, but it is. I think it's a good starting point to build like a ramp Jabba style deck. Moving on, we got a different take on it. It's going to be the Jabba Yellow this time around. So this is a very bounty hunter focused deck. Even plays the bounty guild initiate. So this deck is interesting. Once again, just exact same argument that I would use in the previous version. I think Jabba, generally speaking, just benefits too much from ramp to not play ramp. So I think you should be playing just regular ramp cards like Resupplies, Super Laser Technician to get to ramp into a big stuff. There's a lot of bounty hunter synergies, but I feel like there's a lot of bounty hunters in this deck, but I don't feel like there's a lot of incentive to play a lot of bounty hunters. I feel like there's very few cards that actually work very well as bounty hunters. Like, for example, Relentless Pursuit is quite situational. I love Relentless Pursuit in Boba because Boba is coming in every game and he's relatively high cost units. You have a lot of good stuff to grab with Relentless Pursuit in this deck. Most of the bounty hunters are very cheap, so they're not really going to be able to kill much. So it's going to be quite situational, so I don't think it's worthy of a 3 of. Bounty Guild Initiate also requires you to have like a bounty hunter to really work, and even when it does work, it is quite situational, only affect ground units. So I feel like the bounty hunters synergy that you're running are not really worth are just not very worth it. Here also we see the chain code collector. I get the idea that you can give bounty to anything with Jabba, but there's going to be a lot of situation where you want to basically ambush and kill something as your first action, where you can't really afford to use Jabba's ability first. So I would strongly suggest replacing it by 4LOM, which is going to have better stats, so 4-4-4-4. And yes, it's not going to have the ability, but you don't really care. Because it has more stats, more health, and at least you can just run this right away without waiting for Jabba's ability to be used. So I think it's going to be better in this deck. I just think this card is just strictly worse than 4LOM unless you're playing. I don't see a scenario where you would want to run this over 4LOM. And this also allow you to run Zuckuss as well, which I think can be significantly better than Xanadu Blood. Even though actually, yeah, there's a problem with this list is like there's basically no space units. So this is something also I always want to kind of like make you aware is that you need to balance your deck. And here this deck has basically no space unit. So it's going to be a big problem because if you're going to run against any deck that any amount of space unit, you're just going to straight up lose the game. So you need to balance your approach here and have a bit more space units in order to play things out. I think the main issue with this deck is like it's trying too hard to go around the bounty hunter synergies and forgets what is the plan for the deck. So whenever you think about, okay, what is my plan for this deck? What am I trying to achieve? And so basically here it's not really leaning into ramp because it's not playing any ramp cards, but it's not an aggro deck either. So it's sort of a mid-range deck, but a mid-range deck that contains a lot of cards that I think are pretty weak. If you're going to be going for a mid-range deck, I think mid-range deck by definitions have a weaker game plan, and usually mid-range deck compensate that weaker game plan by either very powerful synergies or very, very powerful cards. And I don't think this deck has either of those things. So there's a couple of cool things going on, of course. The Hunter, so Raction Brood is a very good card with Jabba the Hutt, because it's basically a 4/3 shielded, which is very strong. And it has, of course, the Rancor and Drizden Voss. I think this is his name, right? So Dryden Voss. Yeah, so I think Dryden Voss is, in my opinion, the #1 reason to be running a Jabba Yellow deck. So the way that works is you get a unit in play, you summon Jabba, you capture a unit, and on the same turn you can play Dryden Voss. So it really gives, it doesn't give a lot of, it only gives like one action for the opponent to react to this. And if he does not have an answer to this, that is like such a massive swing. So I think this combination here is the reason to play this deck. So I would try to refocus the deck to kind of take advantage of this specific interaction. So play more ramps so you get to do this little thing faster. And you also get to, and play of course 3 copies of Dryden Voss to increase your chance to be able to achieve that. So Darth Maul makes sense in this deck, even though I think Darth Maul, like if I had to summarize, what do you do, should you decide between playing Maul or playing Vader? My thought process would be, are you sort of an aggro or tempo deck? Then you play Maul. Are you anything else? Play Vader. Is sort of like my thought process here. So here in this deck, if I once again retool the deck a little bit more to be more of a rampy deck, I would definitely play Vader instead of Maul. And then once again, you need to rebalance your space approach. Play the 3/2 Sentinel Starfighters to have a bit of defense in space. Play a few more space units because your 5 space unit is not going to cut it. And this way you can use Vader to search for that space unit and once again rebalance the approach a little bit more. Moving on, we got the Sabine Red Burn. So I actually once again build my own version of Sabine Burn, Sabine Red in my previous video. So this time, Demian89 decided to go for basically not play 4 cars, I believe in, not play any of the Rebel synergies with the no Wing Leader, no Fleet Lieutenant, and instead focus more on the Mandalorian thing. And the double red card like a So Guerrera. So a couple of things here. So first of all, Desperate Attack. I'm not even in an hand deck. I'm not a super big fan of that card. So in this deck, I'm even less of a fan. I think this card is going to be very situational and not good at all. Also, especially if you're playing a Mandalorian focus version, he's playing the Mandalorian Warrior. He's playing the Dark Blade. So even if you're focusing on the Mandalorian version, then I would definitely 100% run 6 copies of Ketsu Onyo. Like 3 copies of Ketsu Onyo and 3 copies of Sabine. Like that seems to be pretty obvious, and it's just so much better than the Rokadak gunship. Even though you can justify a Rokadak gunship, I guess, as a space unit, but you're gonna need 3 copies of those, and then you end up with basically 15 turn 1 play, which I don't think is too much for a deck like this. Not a big fan of Guild Target, because whenever you're playing an aggro deck, you're not really looking to kill enemy units, so redeeming the bounty is not going to be so easy to do. So not a big fan of Guild Target. So you're playing a lot of Mandalorian, so you can play the Mandalorian Warrior. But in my opinion, so generally speaking, I would say that Mandalorians are not very worth it in this set at all, in my opinion. I think you are much better off playing less Mandalorian and playing more of a Rebel approach, and you're gonna have much better results because there's real powerful synergies with the Rebel, like whether it's with Wing Leader or Fleet Lieutenant, and even Metal Ceremony to some extent. I think the Mandalorian synergies are far weaker. So I prefer, personally, I would focus on the Rebels rather than the Mandalorians, generally speaking. And there's also more powerful Rebel cards in general, so it's easier to fill your deck with Rebel cards and just have a few, and just keep the best of the Mandalorians, and it's okay. So as a result, Night Howl Skirmisher, it's not a bad card, but I think there's better things to do. So you basically label the deck as a burn deck, but you're not playing the best burn cards in the game. You're not playing 4 cards, I believe in. You're only playing 1 copies of Chaos of War, so it's not really a burn deck. You are playing the Dark Saber. So the Dark Saber Sabine thing is an interesting concept. So also, Cassian should definitely be in the main deck. I mean, just look at compare those two cards. It's just a matter of like choosing the best card. So I understand that this is a Mandalorian, so it has synergies with Darksaber, but look at the amount of sacrifice that you're making in order to be able to get some Mandalorian synergies. This is a 4/3 for 3. This is a 3/5 for 3. And when this card gets played with so this has more stats, better stats, more survivable. Yes, a little bit less damage, but more survivable. And it is a rebel. And on top of this, it has whenever it plays this Mongol, it comes to play ready, which is super strong. So yeah, Cassian is just so much better than this, in my opinion. It is what I was talking about the rebel cards generally being more powerful than the Mandalorian cards. So not only are the enablers stronger, the payoffs are also stronger. As I said, the wing leader and the lieutenant. So the Darksaber. So basically, Darksaber I think is a playable card even if you're running a deck that is not a Mandalorian deck. And the idea is you deploy Sabine and then you play the Darksaber and then you go to town. I think this can be very powerful. The problem is you need to very specifically do that. You make sure the opponent does not run any upgrade removal. I don't think it's the kind of card you want to have as a 3 of. I think it's the fact that it's playing Darksabers on anything else than your leader is extremely risky. If you run as a removal, a bounce, or anything like upgrades on leaders are usually much safer than on units. So I would personally never advise to play such an expensive upgrades on something that is not a leader because it's just way too risky. Unless the unit has some sort of survivable ability that makes it almost impossible to kill. But for now, we didn't really have that from FFG. So I would always the idea of Darksaber is to be played on Sabine. Anything else would be just extremely risky to do. And the problem is like obviously Sabine, it's only one card in the deck. If it gets killed and then you draw any more Darksabers later on, it's gonna feel very bad. So I think Darksabers remain a relatively situational card. So I don't think you want to run 3 of them. Yeah, so that's it for the deck. The rest of the deck is pretty much what you would expect from the red-white archetype. So yeah, I think as I said, if I had to summarize everything I say, there's a couple of cards that I don't think are really good that should be replaced by stronger cards. It's okay to play a deck that doesn't play 4 cards, I believe in. So then you're allowed to play a couple of cards that you wouldn't be able to play otherwise, like Daring Raid, Reckless Gunslinger, that kind of thing. However, you do need there's a couple of cards here that just simply don't make sense. I think the Rebel synergies are far better than the Mandalorian synergies, and I think you got yourself a deck after that. I'm still thrown on Thorrk in town. There are certain matchups in which it can be good, a matchup that plays a lot of ambush units, but against everything else, I would rather have 5 extra HP personally. But that's debatable. Next we got G Strop with his Gar-Saxon Yellow yellow deck, which is the de facto colors that everybody's been running with Gar-Saxon because it has so many shielded units that benefit from the +1 attack bonus. So let's talk about, so his take on the deck is basically to play a superb control, like basically playing the same idea as for, so this is not a classic Gar-Saxon Yellow deck. Gar-Saxon Yellow deck has been more of an aggro deck where people were running a lot of shielded units and put pressure on the opponent. This is very different than that. It is basically a control Gar-Saxon deck, a little bit in the same idea as we had Boba Fett Blue, where you would have the control shell and then you would have the Boba Fett shell. So I just want to make sure that thing is very well understood about this Boba Blue deck. Boba Blue deck working is not normal. It's an anomaly. And it is an anomaly simply because you are basically kind of playing 2 strategies that kind of work against each other. You're playing like 7th Feet Defender and cards like Fire Spray and aggressive cards, and then on the other hand you're playing like super controlly cards. And those 2 approaches basically effectively work against each other, right? And overall the deck was much more of a control deck than it was an aggro deck. So this should not be working, but it is working in the case of Boba Fett for 2 very specific reasons. It's working because Boba Fett, because the leader Boba Fett works is just super overpowered, and it was just simply, even as a control leader, it worked because it was really easy to get to basically take advantage of the untap effects. So basically Boba Fett's ability allow you to untap, untapping your resources was very useful in the context of the control deck. And it works because Boba Fett as a leader, because of 4/7, still can clear out the board. Like the amazing stat for price allows it to basically be used as a removal as on stick, which I think is very good. And I think you also had Fire Spray, which, yes, okay, Fire Spray could be used as a win condition to win the game fast, but it can also be used as a control card because it comes into play, can attack right away. So even though, yes, those cards were kind of a control cards, they are cards that are so overpowered and so out of bound with anything we know in the game that they end up just working even in a control deck. But I don't think Gar Saxon is as even close to the same power level as we saw in earlier. So there's a couple of things that are very strong, of course, is 7th Speed Defender and stuff, but here you really have the split between the aggro approach and the control approach, which I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work at all. So there's a couple of cross synergies that are interesting, of course. The client is good in the control deck, and it is good with Gar Saxon, so there's kind of cross synergies between the control approach and Gar Saxon. Once again, same with Lieutenant Shalsen, even though it is on the much weaker side. And then Beep Fortuna allow you to play your super expensive spell faster and gets the +1 attack from. Those are cute things, but at the end of the day, the +1 attack is not going to help you. You really have your, what we call in French, your ass between two chairs, where you don't really know where to sit. And I think your deck is going to suffer from that as a result. So I understand what you're trying to do. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think. First of all, the Boba Fett package takes also a lot of less space. Basically, Boba Fett's package, only thing you really need is a Fire Spray and the Boba itself. And then you can play 7th Speed Defender if you want, but you got a couple of space units. That's fine. But here the package takes so much more space. Like there's like a lot of units here. Even playing like, you guys first playing that Dr. Evazan, which I think is Dr. Evazan is gonna be, I don't think is really good in a deck that is not an aggro deck. And also Dr. Evazan gets a lot better if you're playing McClunky, if you're playing ways to get it back into your hand. I don't think Dr. Evazan is simply just a 2-drop you can jam in any deck. I think you have to play McClunky, you have to play a new adventure in order to keep him alive, to make sure that the opponent doesn't collect the bounty without having to mobilize a tremendous amount of resources. Yeah, so same, the Clan Saxon Gauntlet is not on the same power level as a Fire Spray, all that stuff. So overall, I understand what you're trying to do. I don't think it's going to work. I think you're going to have your ass sitting between two chairs, where between the aggro approach, you basically, either you're going to have a very aggressive hand, like you're going to have a very aggressive stat, you're going to be able to do Evazan turn 1, Fleet Defender turn 2, and then Shalsen turn 3 and put a lot of pressure and stuff. And then you're gonna draw all those useless control cards that don't help you into what you're trying to achieve, which is the aggro plan. And on the other hand, sometimes you're gonna be on the control plan, and you're gonna draw all those units that don't help you controlling the game, and that's gonna bat you in the ass. So yeah, I understand what you're trying to do. I don't think it's gonna work. So this is more not a criticism of the card choice, but more criticism of the idea of the deck, the entire game plan. Next we got Palatine by Empress 3. This is a Palatine Blue. And yeah, so the deck makes a lot of sense. So we're going for the ramp to get those super big fatties and try to overpower the opponent. So my main criticism about this deck is that I think it's extremely greedy. I think it plays too much late game, and I don't think this deck can realistically survive against an aggro deck. Yes, we got a couple of tools to survive against aggro, as with Palatine, notably the client. But keep in mind that the client is not, it's not the ultimate answer against aggro. On itself, this doesn't do really much. You still need to have other cards to kill the opponent units. And here you don't have a lot of removals. Only 2 copies of Power of the Dark Side, only 1 copies of Tark in town. There's basically no early game removal. Constant Star Viper without Energy Converge Lab is too slow. We got the Emperor's Royal Guard, but only five officials to really enable it. So not gonna be this guy is not gonna have Sentinel most of the time. There's the synergies between Yularen and what's it called? Yeah, Crumb, which I think is a good synergy against aggro. But I think overall, only 2 copies of each. Timely Intervention is like I understand Timely Intervention is super busted on Avenger and Reinforcement Walker, but you need to get there because you have to pay an extra resources on top of the 8 resources. I mean, you're talking about a 9 resources Reinforcement Walker. That is like so incredibly expensive. Also, I have to say, Timely Interventions and Avenger is actually not a combo because here's the way that works. You're going to be playing the first Avenger, so you play Avenger, your opponent sacrifice a card. Then if your opponent sacrifice the only space unit that is on the board, then basically you cannot ambush because there's nothing to ambush anymore. So then you attack into some. Let's say your opponent has 2 space units on the board. You play your Avenger, sacrifice a unit, then go ambush, and your opponent is simply just going to sacrifice the unit that you're ambushing. So basically, Timely Intervention into Avenger, this combo here does not work in reality. So that's something to keep in mind. Snoke, I think, is very strong in a hard control deck, but in this case you do play a lot of units, so you're gonna hurt yourself a lot with your own Snoke. So that's something to bear in mind. I think there's better things to do in the 8 resources mark, even though there might be situations where you're gonna be very happy to have it. I think in a lot of cases it's gonna. Same for Super Laser Blast. You do play a lot of units, so Super Laser Blast is not really the there's going to be a situation where it's going to be good, obviously, but it's in a lot of situations it's not going to be good, and I don't think your deck needs Super Laser Blast to dominate the late game. Between Palatine and all those late game cards, you should be more than fine if you get to that point. So Reinforcement Walker does work very well with Timely Reinforcement. So if I was going to be playing Timely Reinforcement, it would definitely be for Walker. But that's basically the only card that really benefits a lot from Timely Reinforcement. Everything else is kind of like meh. Like it's okay with, and if you really want to give ambush to your big units, I would rather play Piet, because at least you can play Piet beforehand. It's additional officials to turn on your Royal Guard. You can play beforehand, so then you can play Walker on curve and have it ambush. Where here you can't play it on curve, you have to pay at least an extra resources for it. So 3 Relentless main deck is just crazy. Like there's Relentless is very good against hard control, but against everything else it's bad. It's just gonna be very, very slow. So yeah, this is just way too much late game. There's no way against or just a regular aggro deck that you can survive the early game. The client by himself is not gonna be enough. So I would advise get rid of a lot of late game cards and just refocus the deck a bit more on the early stage of the game. You can keep the Avengers, you can keep the Devastators, you can keep the Walker, just save on the, maybe put the Relentless in the sideboard or just have 1 copy of Relentless. If you really want to have Relentless against control, then even 1 Relentless is going to be good because the games are so long, you're likely to be able to get to draw into it anyway at some point. And try to get more early game removal, especially Power the Dark Side, absolutely no brainer, a 3 of in this deck. You need to keep yourself alive in the early stage of the game, especially against aggro. Another thing as well is that once again you got no space defense against aggro. You need to be playing either the System Patrol Crafts to keep yourself alive in space, or you need to be playing the 3/2 Sentinels, which combines very well with once again I always suggest this card, a 3/2 Sentinels in black that protects you early on against space. And you can play the Vader to search for it, and then you get to get that card. You get to help with that card, so that's very good. So all this would help. Also, maybe some Phase 3 Death Trooper to keep yourself alive in the early stages of the game. So you have it in the sideboard here. Oh yeah, Garon Guard also definitely, in my opinion, should be in the main deck. In my opinion, this card is so good. You need to keep yourself alive, pretty much. And this deck doesn't do that. So I'm sure if you get to the late game, you're gonna beat a lot of decks. I think it's powerful, but Um, Even though there's a couple of counter synergies here in the different late game cards, but you need. I don't think this deck can realistically get there against most decks. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. This was the last list I reviewed. Obviously, this is just my opinion. I could be wrong on some of those things that I'm saying. I hope this was informative, and thank you for submitting those interesting ideas. Definitely the deck that I would want to try among the list that you've posted was definitely the Han Yellow deck is definitely the list I would want to try. The other list I've more or less already tried some of those. If I was gonna try to make Grand Inquisitor work in this set, I would probably lean towards double red because, as I said, all of the great Grand Inquisitor cards are red black anyway, so might as well just lean into that and get advantage of the double red cards, which I think are quite powerful, including the 3/3/4/2. I think is excellent for Grand Inquisitor. So and I'm definitely gonna give it a try. I think a Palatine also. I think it's gonna be very strong in this set. No reason why it wouldn't be. It's gonna be exciting to experiment, and I hope this was informative. And once again, if you're interested in getting coaching on your deck, so this is a good representative of like the kind of coaching that I'm giving. If you're interested in list building, then we do list building, and then you can also do gameplay. So feel free to fill the schedule on the comments in the description. Sorry, if you're interested in getting better in the game, or at least hearing what I have to say. And anyway, thank you so much for submitting those lists, and I'll see you next time.